HRN listeners. As we celebrate our 15th year, we are deepening our commitment to giving voice to the next generation of food systems storytellers, and we need your help. Our internship and fellowship programs help activate new possibilities for underrepresented and underestimated young people through experiential journalism, audio engineering, and production training. Through these unique programs, HRN helps food equity stewards build essential workforce readiness skills that expand their potential and foster economic mobility. Please consider supporting these critical programs. And with a minimum donation, you can be entered to win a dinner for two at an amazing restaurant in one of 8 cities and tickets to a concert at a great venue in one of those cities. We have incredible partners across the country who have donated, as they also share our passion for helping to educate the next generation of food systems storytellers. Check out heritageradionetwork.org/15 to donate and enter to win today. That's heritageradionetwork.org/15 to donate and enter to win today. And make sure you donate before March 31st. Thank you.
Stay tuned for a live broadcast on heritageradionetwork.com. Stay tuned for a live broadcast on heritageradionetwork.com. Broadcasting live from Roberta's in Bushwick, Brooklyn, you're listening to heritageradionetwork.com. Today we'd like to send a special thank you to the following restaurants for supporting No Goat Left Behind: Sambar and Mapesh. Show your support at these restaurants by ordering one of the menu items featuring goat. Goat is the most eaten protein in the entire world, yet in the U.S. we import most of our goat. Our dairy farms are forced to kill some male goats at birth because there's no market for them. Help make a change. Support No Goat Left Behind.
Okay, it's a rainy Thursday in Brooklyn, and you are tuned into the Heritage Radio Network. You're listening to The Farm Report, and we are coming to you live from the back of Roberta's at 261 Moore Street in Bushwick, Brooklyn. Talking about goats today, I want to thank Jack for the shout out on the No Goat Left Behind project. Jake, who are you? Who is this mystery man? It's a little Wizard of Oz behind the curtain over there. No Goat Behind, kind of wrapping up. Our last group of animals went to the slaughterhouse this past week, and we'll be hitting restaurants on Monday. So if you haven't already gone out for a taste of goat, make sure you do. Want to say thanks to Finn over at Fatty Crab, who hosted myself and Margot and Alex of Consider Bardwell Farms last week. We had some amazing goat with them. So big thanks to Finn. And we are on the line today with Mark Guanzini, one of our No Goat Left Behind farmers. Mark is of Highwood Farm up in Spencer, New York. Mark, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Awesome. Great. So glad to have you on the show today. Really looking forward to kind of continuing the conversations we've been having around goat in the Northeast and the world. So why don't we start by getting a little bit of background on you and about Highwood, kind of what your experience in farming was, how you got into it, a little bit of the details of the farm, the size, how many animals, what breeds, just kind of a general overview.
Okay, well, quickly, we got into the business. Actually, it was my wife's initiative. She grew up on Long Island, and as a youngster growing up, her family had a farm in northeastern Pennsylvania, her grandparents' farm, and they spent the summers there, and she fell in love with animals and living in rural areas. And so as soon as she got out of high school, she went to SUNY Farmingdale for a little bit and then transferred to Cornell, where she got a degree in animal science and began raising animals on her own in farms that she found. And when her and I met, she had recently purchased the farm that we now run together. and I decided to stick with her and the farm rather than pursue an academic career. And we got our first goats together about 15 years ago, and it started out with just 2 animals. We borrowed a buck and have pretty much grown the herd internally since. We had one early episode where we purchased animals from outside, but mostly we raise our own replacements here. It's a hill farm. We have about 180 acres in total. It's about half woodlot, half pasture. The herd has grown to about 80 or so breeding animals and replacement animals, and annually we kid it about 100, give or take 20 kids in a season.
Wow. So, I mean, you didn't have a background in farming, so how did you decide on goats? And can you talk a little bit about, was that an obvious decision, or were you guys thinking about doing some other things? And how did the property kind of lend itself to that animal?
Sure. Well, she had quite a bit of experience before we met in small ruminants. She had raised both sheep and goats previously. And so, the decision to continue along those lines, rested in part on her expertise as a small ruminant herds person. I was enthusiastic to farm, but didn't have any real personal experience. Both my grandparents farmed. I'd been around farms as a kid, but I grew up in the suburbs as well. And through my life as a student and in college, it just sort of bumbled around into one thing or another. But when the opportunity to become involved in this project, presented itself, I was very enthusiastic. But the reason we're in goats is because of Luce and her experiences more so than anything I did. Although I will say that when it comes time to deal with the animals as a person who doesn't have a lot of experience, I'm often glad that I'm not dealing with cattle.
Yeah,
and that we can work with the goats instead.
So when you began, you said you had 2 goats, and you guys have grown the herd over the last 15 years. So what, like in the beginning, I'm assuming you guys both had off-farm jobs, and now what does that look like? I mean, a lot of
people that farm on our scale have to have off-farm income because there's simply not enough money to be made at this level to support. I have taught in the past and still do occasionally, but the full-time, the off-farm income that supports us, provides for our health insurance and retirement, is through the efforts of Luce, who works at the university as a technician, and I do a little teaching, have another small business interest, and then most of my time, and when I'm doing what I want to do, I'm working on the farm.
So can you kind of take us through maybe a typical week? I mean, with the goats, what are the things that you need to do to take care of them? What are the equipment that needs to be on the farm that you're using, and just give us a general sense of what that looks like, over the course of a week or so.
Yeah, well, what a week looks like depends a lot on what time of the year it is. The goats are seasonal breeders, and so we target our breeding to the last weeks in April, first weeks in May, and we could talk about why later. But around that time, of course, there's one set of activities that are involved. But once the animals are born through the time when they, for the rest of the year, it's just a question, I get up in the morning, go to the barn, do whatever feeding is required. In the winter, obviously we're providing hay for them. When the does are lactating, they're getting some corn and soybean to supplement whatever feed they're on. In the summer, from May through, it depends on when it snows, but we're still, pasture grazing the animals, and so that involves getting them up. We use a couple herding dogs to help move the animals, and they go to whatever pasture we're in at the time. We bring the animals in every night, primarily as a predation control measure. We have a lot of coyotes in our area. We've never had a problem with coyote predation, and I believe that the main reason is because the animals are only out during the day and we don't leave them out at night. So the local coyotes haven't developed a taste for goat yet, and that's worked out pretty well for us. But it does involve the extra work of taking them out to a pasture daily and bringing them back. And sometimes we may go as far as a quarter mile for pasture. It just depends.
Wow, and I guess we should note too that a lot of the farms that we've worked with through the No Goat Left Behind project have been dairy farms where they're doing kind of some of the animals are milking a few times a day, and then they also have this other set of animals that they're raising up for meat. But at your farm, you're just doing animals for meat production, correct?
Yeah, we try to avoid milking goats if we possibly can. We try to let the kids do that for us, and we're pretty successful in that regard. So, yeah.
What breeds are you working with on the farm?
Well, the foundation stock that we had dairy in their background. We've actually liked to keep that in the herd a little bit. We buy bucks that are pretty high percentage boar usually, although we've on occasion retained one of our own bucks who we felt had some good dairy character in it. The reason being to try to keep high milk production in our does, because as soon as you have to supplement milk for a kid, your economy pretty much goes in the toilet. Milk replacer is very expensive, and so we're feeding the does anyway. And if they can produce enough milk to feed the kids themselves, and typically we experience twins, some triplets. We had one set of quads one time. Whew. And it's a strain on an animal to raise two kids. It's real hard to raise three. In the cases of four, that wasn't. She got two, and two of them went to other does. But when a doe can't raise her own kids for whatever reason, we typically try to foster those kids off on another animal so that we have the goats raising the kids instead of us.
And that is different too than what you're going to find on a dairy farm, because on the dairy farm, they're really looking, the product there.
Product.
Yeah, they're looking for milk as their product, and so that is, that is a big difference there. Is that the animals that they stay on to raise up as young stock are getting fed the milk replacer. What is milk replacer? I mean, what's in that?
Well, it's honestly, I can't tell you, the breakdown, but it's a combination of milk proteins that have been acquired from some other source. There would be fats. They're certainly supplemented with vitamins and minerals and things of that nature. I mean, it's the goal of the people that produce that to as closely mimic the natural product as they can. And I'll have to plead ignorance as to whether or not they attempt to put any kind of passive immunizing agents in there. My guess would be not. But of course, one of the purported advantages, and it's a real advantage of having a kid on a doe right from the get-go, is they get the disease protection from the doe in the first day or so of lactation, and then the kids grow well enough on the milk replacer, but it's extra work. Once the kid has decided that you're its mom until, as long as you've got it.
Right.
And, having a bunch of kids that try to jump in your back pocket every time you go in the barn, it's cute for a while, but eventually, that can start to wear on you a little bit, too. Yeah,
I definitely had that experience when we took a visit up to Consider Bardwell, and we're out kind of in the pasture with some of their male animals, and they just jump right. They're so curious, jumping right.
Yeah,
and
very curious.
Yeah, it was very cute. I had like a very Snow White moment, but that the fun of that kind of dissipated pretty quickly.
Yeah. Well, we try to handle the animals, a fair bit, and I spent quite a bit of time with them. And you don't want them to be so afraid of you that you can't get near them. But by the same token, by nature they're a predator species. They should be wary of things. So you try to draw a balance where it's reasonable to manage the animal, but you don't invoke panic every time you come around them. And And some are by nature a little bit more curious and friendly than others. And so we have a pretty nice herd that we work with here, and we're grateful for that.
Yeah. So, so it sounds like, milk replacer, I guess we can think of like the human equivalent would be, feeding your kids formula
yeah. It's powdered, stuff we buy, and you would mix it with water. And we always keep some on hand, but on a good year we don't really use it hardly at all, and on a bad year we will end up using it in a limited fashion, because there will become reasons why, a doe can't, produce enough milk if there are just a variety of things that can cause that. They could develop, mastitis or something in the middle of lactation, and then, we observe the kids. If we see somebody that looks like it's trying to steal from somebody else, then we investigate why and decide if we need to supplement it or not. Just try to keep an eye on the does and stuff. And usually, if we're going to take a kid away from its natural mother and try to get somebody else to raise it, that's something that needs to be done pretty early. Mm-hmm. The does aren't that accepting of other animals unless you're, you have a fairly narrow window of opportunity to do that. But we've been fairly successful in the times that we've tried. But every once in a while, we'll end up with a kid that we raise on a bottle. But like I say, that stuff's pretty expensive.
Yeah,
so generally, your economy goes out the window on that. Once you have to do that, you can never really recoup that cost.
Well, we're going to take a quick break, and when we get back, I'd love to tuck into some of the kind of medical and care decisions that you have to make with the animals throughout the course of their life. But we'll take a moment for a breather, and then we'll bring it back.
Okay.
Bring the smile, let God bring the sunshine. Home to you. Home to you. Home to you. I hate to rush you, but I love you already. Love you already. Already. No time is too soon.
All right, we're back. You're listening to the Farm Report on the Heritage Radio Network, and we are on the line with Mark Wanzini of Highwood Farm, talking goats. So, Mark, before the break, we were talking about milk replacer and kind of the first the first couple of days in the life of a baby goat, and you had mentioned, if they're able to stay with their mother, they get these kind of auxiliary benefits from the milk. And I think what you're talking about there is, I believe they call it colostrum.
That's correct.
Yeah, so the kind of that there's this kind of magical window right after birth where the mother is producing not just milk, but this whole other kind of series of things that really kind of bolster the immune system and go to support the kid in the early stages. And that's the same across all mammals, correct?
Yeah, there are variations within species in terms of how long, the window of opportunity for passive immunity from the mother to the young is, and things of that nature. But in general, yeah, mammals do that.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the other decisions that kind of come into play with regards to making decisions about, how you're going to raise your herd. And some of the things that I would like to touch on with you would be denubbing, circumcision, ear tags, and kind of what's kind of the norm in the goat world, and why do those choices get made, and kind of what do they involve? So, if we're looking kind of at a chronological order, kind of how some of those things come into play, and then
Sure.
Also touching on, maybe this is a little ambitious, but talking a little bit about parasite management. I mean, that's something that's come up with a lot of the other producers, but we haven't really been able to talk about what that actually means as far as taking care of the animal. So
yeah, good. So, one thing that begins actually before the kids are born is that the herd gets vaccinated a month or so in advance of kidding, and the point there is to bolster the doe's immunity so that the colostrum that she produces is going to be enriched in the kinds of things that experience tells you you're likely to encounter, right? And then after parturition, when the kid hits the ground, we generally try to be there if we can. Sometimes they're born in the middle of the night, and you're not. But again, we make the decision to have our animals have their kids in or near the barn. And that's actually a bit of issue in the industry right now. If you go to Texas, New Zealand, Australia, they're very big on pasturing in the field. And the idea is it's less labor intensive. But in a herd of 100 like we have, not a lot of problems with birthing, but there are some. And of course, if the animals are doing that on pasture and they have problems, the outcome would be guarded at best, and perhaps you would lose animals. Our goal is to try to lose as few animals as possible. In goats, like in humans, birthing is it's a tricky business, and sometimes you have problems. But our preference is to be there. We try to make sure that the kid gets up. There's a few issues that they can have early on that if you detect they're easy to deal with, and get them nursing so that we know that the doe has claimed the kid. Young does often will try to reject their kids. We don't tolerate that. We keep them in a pen with that kid until the mom knows who the kid is and everything is fine. And in the overwhelming number of instances, that's easy. You get the odd animal where you have to actually work at that a little bit to make that parent-kid bond work for you. They stay in we call them jugs, but they're just small pens. The does get put on some supplemental grain at that point, so that through their lactation we supplement the hay or forage that they have a little. Before the kids are let out, they are ear tagged. It's important to be able to ID animals, and that's a relatively easy way to do it. It's very quick. I'm sure it hurts a little bit while it's happening, but the one thing that you notice with these animals is that they're in the moment. Whatever's happening right now is important to them. As soon as it's over, they're on to something new. So we feel pretty good about that, and we think that doing it early is better than doing it
And that's essentially
later.
like piercing their ears.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's just this little pliers thing. It takes less than a second. The doe kids are then done. They're good to go. But we, at that time, unless there's a reason why we wanted to save an animal for breeding, which we rarely do, the kids get castrated. Now, we struggled over the years with a good method to do that, and there's sort of two things you can do. One is sort of semi-surgical. The advantage of it is that it's fast. It has a complication rate that we ultimately decided was a little high. Mm-hmm. The other common method is to use bands. Mm-hmm. The problem that we have with that, of course, is it's uncomfortable. Wrap a rubber band around your finger. It'll quit hurting eventually, but for a while, and then your finger will fall off.
Right.
But for a while, that's uncomfortable. And we observe the animals, and they're walking funny for a couple of days. So we've actually recently started to inject the spermatocord with lidocaine before we do that, and we feel that that's been pretty successful. It makes us feel good anyway.
So wait, so you're injecting it with lidocaine and then you're banding, or the?
That's correct.
Okay, just so the lidocaine acts as
it's just a local anesthetic.
Okay.
Right. So.
And why circumcise? Why castrate? I always say circumcise.
One is people generally like the quality of the meat better. If the testicles are intact in a male animal, it's going to get gamey. And the older they get, the more so that's going to be the case. But the other more practical thing is that these things will become reproductively active so quick that it becomes a management issue to have them in the herd, because they're going to start trying to breed back. by 5 months of age to other animals that are in the herd. And because you don't want them breeding, this is just sort of an easy way to handle, that problem as well. So it's both what the market wants and just a management issue. We keep a couple of bucks on the place. They get along together just fine. But you have too many boys running around, you kind of, I think, asking for trouble.
And have you noticed, one of the kind of conversations I've been having with a couple of the farmers is, the speculation that there is some size difference between if you castrate or if you don't castrate the animals, that they grow faster or slower.
Will become taller.
Okay.
That's a fact. That's when they become sexually mature. The sex steroid hormones. One of the things they do is turn off the growth hormone system. So in animals that are castrated when they're young, eventually they'll quit growing, but it's delayed. And so weathered animals are, generally will be taller and large.
And weathered is a term that refers
to. But typically,
to
the weathers, they're going to market way before they're done growing anyway.
Okay.
So you don't see that unless it's sort of a pet, that you keep around, and they can be quite big.
Huh. So the castration happens pretty early on, and then
4 days.
4 days, and then
3 or 4 days. Yeah, we.
What is it? The term denubbing, as far as because goats.
Sure,
disbudding. That's what I'm like.
The removal
didn't
of the
sound
horn.
right.
Yeah. So the reason why people want to remove horns is because for animals that are going to be on the farm, they can be a bit of a nuisance. They have a tendency to get stuck in feeders. If you got one animal that's got them and others that don't, they can be a competitive, disadvantage. The animals can possibly hurt themselves on them. So it's sort of generally felt that it's easier to keep animals that don't have horns. So the only ones that this is an issue for us are ones that we intend to keep for ourselves, or that we think somebody else might want to buy and use as breeding stock. The animals that go to market, we don't disbud them. That's not an issue. And so this is another thing where, our method is, would be criticized because of the amount of effort that it takes. But we generally will anesthetize an animal before we take its horns off, and we do it with a hot iron. It's a special tool that you plug in. And you get them when they're young, and you burn the area around the budding horn where the growing material would be, and that if you do a good job, will prevent the horns from growing. And the reason why the use of anesthetics for that is not widely practiced is that goats are pretty sensitive to them. You've got to be really careful how much you give them. It's fairly easy to overdose of goats. A lot of vets wouldn't recommend it, especially not to people who didn't have a lot of experience with that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But for us, we can do it. It doesn't cost that much. We just like it better, so we do it.
And so the animals that go to market, the ones that you're not disbudding, how big are their horns going to be, and what age are they usually when you're sending them to market?
Well, typically they're going to be 5 months to less than a year. If they grow fast, they're ready to go. Our kids were born in April and May this year, and they're the ones that grew well are gone already. Right, and we got a handful of slow-growing animals that will continue to mature, and by December or January, they'll be ready they'll be market weight as well. So, and these guys, their horns are like 3-4 inches long. It's not that big of a deal, but they'll get 6 to 9 inches long if you leave them on, and that starts to become an issue at feeder spaces and things of that nature. So we take them off the does, but that's it.
So then, as the animals, those are. Are we missing anything? Is there any other kind of like vaccinations or kind of herd management?
The kids.
Okay.
They get the passive immunity from the colostrum that they got from the doe. But after a month or so, or a couple months, I guess, you give them vaccines, and then you boost them a month or so later. And and then again, the ones that are in the breeding program, will annually get a vaccine before they kid. So that's important. We've never had a problem, and I guess it's because of the vaccine, with the kinds of diseases that you vaccinate against on our farm. So, and these are things like tetanus and Clostridium, and things of that nature. There's really three other diseases with the goats that are a management problem. Two of them are goat diseases. They're susceptible to worms, and the important worm that goats get is something called Haemonchus contorta, or the barber pole worm. It causes gastrointestinal bleeding and can kill the animals. So that's probably, historically for sure, and in general, I think probably the biggest disease problem that people face with the animals once they've grown up. And you could treat that with chemical wormers, which is commonly done. There's reasons to try to avoid the use of chemical wormers. They're expensive, for one thing. The worms do develop resistance to them, and that's a problem. Trying to keep a wormer on hand that's effective can be a real challenge in and of itself. And so there's a couple things that people try to do to minimize the use of that. And the one that we have the most success with is that we rotationally graze to try to disrupt the life cycle of the parasite. And we use minimal wormer for goat parasites. Before they go out in the pasture in the spring, when the does are in the jugs with their babies, they get wormed once, and that's, as far as the goat parasites are concerned, that's it. For the rest of the year, as long as we rotate them off of pastures on a schedule that's shorter than the time it takes the eggs to hatch in the field and become infective, then we don't have to worry about the animals becoming reinfected. And we have a lot of land, and we can leave pastures fallow. Essentially, we graze them once, and then try not to get back onto them for 4 or 5 months, or until after there's been a killing frost.
Okay, so the worms are coming from. So the worms, the parasites that you're talking about, they kind of exist just in general in nature, or they come on and off?
They're all over the place. I mean, when we first got our goats, we tried to make sure that they were as clean of worms as we could get, and it didn't take long, and they were back, and I'm not sure where they came from. But, if you've got these animals, the worms are just, co-travelers.
Okay.
And what you do is you try to keep it so that you don't get sick animals as a result. And the reason why we worm in the spring when they're in the jugs is that this worm goes into a hypobiotic state over the winter where it doesn't do anything to the animal, but then in the spring it will emerge, if they have any in them, and start to become a problem. Well, this is precisely at the time when the doe is trying to produce milk for the kid. They're under a lot of metabolic stress anyway, and so we feel that just in case somebody's got some, we'll take that opportunity to try to knock that back, and then through the rotational grazing, we're able to keep the kids from getting infected and to keep the does from becoming reinfected. Now, somebody's going to pick up something somewhere, because they pass over laneways, and occasionally somebody will stop to eat. But our goal is to have our program keep the amount of parasite that's on our farm low enough so that the probability that somebody's going to ingest eggs, or what they ingest are larvae in the field, is really low. And we don't have any clinical issues with that disease anymore. We monitor the animals because I see them every day when we go to and from pasture. If somebody doesn't look right, we investigate. But mostly we feel we've got our barber pole worm problem pretty under control. So that's good. The other one that's a real problem, especially with the kids, is coccidiosis. This is a ubiquitous bug, and it's very hard to have a herd that's free of that. So again, the advantage of driving the goats to pasture every day is I can see them from the hind end, And if I see any evidence of diarrhea in a kid, we're just all over it, treating that kid with coccidia medicine to get rid of it. And this became a problem for us as our herd began to grow, and we were kind of caught unaware because, we'd never had this problem, and then all of a sudden we had tons of it, and we're going, where did this come from?
Right, what's happening?
And what our vet said was, well, you went from being a small farm to being a medium farm, and that's what happens. But again, with any of these disease situations, the trick is to catch it early and deal with it right away before it can spread around and become a problem. So, we have to treat kids for coccidia every year. Some are more susceptible than others. It's the kind of thing, usually if you get one you'll get one that gets it, and it's really hard to get them to give it up. They'll get better, then they'll get worse, then they'll get better. But it's really just a matter of being vigilant and diligent in dealing with it. And compared to the one or two, what I would consider really black years about a decade ago, things are pretty good. During the time when the kids are real young, we put a coccidia stat in the mineral that they get that helps to just to keep the numbers in the place low. Mm-hmm. And then of course if an animal shows a tendency to become sick that way, or if their babies show a tendency to become sick that way, then they become not good candidates to breed again in the future. And you try to build in animals that are hardy and resistant to these things, because different animals are more resistant to all of these diseases than others. And so through a selection process, you try to get yourself a herd that has as few problems as possible so that you can rely on chemical or medical treatments as little as possible. Because those things are expensive.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I think it's helpful. It's helpful for me anyway to think about it like any population of people. There's always going to be within any group somebody who has some type of issue, and as populations get larger, the kind of variety or the number will change. And so, from a public health perspective, you have kind of the management things you can do, and then you have treatment for individuals, and it works very similarly on a farm with a group of animals.
Biology.
Yeah. Well, Mark, thank you so much. It was a fascinating discussion, and I will let our viewers know that your animals will be throughout New York City this next week. If they want to visit us at www.heritagefoodsusa.com, you can find out where to eat for this last week of Goattober and get a taste of the animals from Highwood Farm. And Mark, thank you so much for being on the show today, and I look forward to bringing you back to talk more about some of the stuff we went over today.
It will be my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for your interest in our animals. Bye-bye.
Bye.